Hi, everyone. Thank you for the intro. What I'd like to do is give a very high-level intro to what we call ESOPs, hopefully benefiting from experience that I've had both at the start and at the end when there's an exit, some things that I've learned and hopefully some tips that will help you think about these issues. So without further ado. So first of all, ESOP is a loosely used term. Before we actually jump in, I just wanted to survey some of the uses that it goes. Tying into the earlier session about raising money, ESOP is an issue that comes up in the investment because very often when you're forming your cap table, when you're presenting your company valuation, it's very common for the investors to say, well, we want the ESOP in already. And what they mean by that is they want to know what the employees have and are going to have and not be diluted by the fact that after the investment, you'll finally be able to take a breath and start granting options and other equity awards to your employees. So in this context, ESOP really means how much are we reserving of the company's capitalization for the purpose of incentivizing employees and service providers. The option pool is another meaning of that's related to that. When you say, I have like on your cap table, there'll be ESOP. And what does ESOP mean? It means this is comprised of the total reserve that you're giving for employees. So if you have a cap table that has 1 million shares issued, there may be 100,000 shares that you're saying, well, this is intended for employees. Some of that will be what's called allocated. Those are the grants you've already made to employees. But the idea is you're taking into account also what's unallocated. And that number is in flux over the life of the company because you give options to employees. Maybe some of them leave their options unless if they're unvested or if they were vested and they didn't exercise them, they'll return to the pool. So the pool is sort of the note that the company makes to itself. Here's what I intend to give to my employees. And that gives you a framework for what employees, what you have to give to employees. The real meaning of ESOP, it's an abbreviation for Employee Stock Option Plan. It's probably more accurate to talk about equity plans in general, although in early stage companies, which I assume is the emphasis here, the grant you're usually making will be options and not something else. And in Israel, that's sort of the default and the correct security that you should be giving grants in, and we'll talk about exactly what that means. Sometimes people talk about ESOP in the sense of each individual employee, like you're hiring an executive, so what's my ESOP? And what they really mean is, what am I getting? What's my percentage? What's my stake in the company? What I have to say here is everyone wants to talk in percentages, and it's okay to express it like that, but you got to be careful what that means, because as a company, you're typically promising people things and writing down, okay, you'll get, 1% of the company, but that's a moving target, right? I mean, because it depends on what's happening in the company. If you tell someone they're getting 1% of the company the day after you form the company, that's different than 1% the day after you closed your first investment. And that can lead to disputes and misunderstandings. So you really want to be careful about how you're presenting that. ESOP can also mean the special terms that will apply to specific grants, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Timing and implementation, what's the right time? We're going to talk about that as well. It's in a perfect world, these things are all taken care of immediately as soon as you form the company, but in the real world, it may not be the first priority. It may not be the right thing to do it first, and so we'll talk about that. Okay, so why give equity? What do we mean by equity? Equity means a piece of the company, basically. And so why are we giving our employees a piece of the company? This, as opposed to the salary that's paid every month, is something you're looking to the long term. You're saying, hey, we're interested in what you're going to do for the next 3 months, but we want you here for the long haul. And so it creates a long-term incentive. It's saying we see you as the future of the company. It makes the employees like the other stakeholders. So you have founders in a company, they own shares. Investors come in and they have shares, they want rights. And you're saying, hey, we want to make you, we're not asking you to put money into the company. We're asking you to put your efforts into the company, which is just as valuable, if not more, than the actual funds to pay for everything. And so we're saying, we see you like other stakeholders. And so you're aligning their interests with the company's interests. They're not here, to get their salary and then to move on, but they have a stake in the long-term interests of the company. It's a way of paying a bonus to people on a deferred basis. Today, I'm a startup, I'm lean and mean. I don't have cash to pay bonuses, even at the end of the year. I just don't, I have a burn rate, and I'm very conscious of, the implications of that. And so this is a way of saying, hey, well, when the company's made it, you'll be there and you'll get your bonus. And so it's easy in that sense for a company, for an entrepreneur, to give that away. Another reason why equity is important, especially in Israel, is that the equity benefit is significantly better from a tax perspective than regular income. So if you're there, we'll talk about what the requirements are. If you're jumping through all the hoops to get it to be a compliant plan and the grants to be compliant, then we're talking about a 25% tax rate on the gains that the employee will see versus for the equivalent up to 50% and more, including national insurance. So it gives you a way of giving value, twice as much value to the employee for the same dollar amounts. The other thing is, and I don't dismiss this, but everybody's doing it. You can't hire in Israel qualified software engineers if you're not giving equity. Not everyone, even among the very young engineers, knows what that means, but they know they should be getting equity. And that it's numbers, it's abstract. At the beginning of a company's life, it doesn't really mean anything, but it's saying, hey, there's an education process in as well. My point is that 99% of the companies, that's correct. If you're a young company that sees an exit in the near or mid future, or sees an IPO, then it does make sense to be giving equity. But there are situations where it's not appropriate. So like if you're a family business, you're a 1 or 2 man show, and you're wholly own your company, you don't have investors, you're going to be you're profitable. There are startups that are profitable. Then it may not make sense to be giving equity in your company, because if there's not an exit on the horizon, then why should anyone want shares? And so maybe they'll get dividends, or whatever. But it's a different equation. And so the point is, it's not it's a fit for most companies in the Israeli startup environment, but it's not a fit for every single company. So the technical matters of what are the hoops that you need to jump through in order to qualify for the better tax rate in Israel. So you need to have a plan that has the necessary provisions that the tax authority wants to see in the plan. And these are really like technical things about how the grants are made and how they're held in trust, etc. So you need to file that with the tax authority. You need to wait for at least 30 days after you've made that filing before you can actually make grants that are compliant. And so if you do it earlier, then they won't be compliant. You'll have to fix that. You can only give these qualifying grants to what are employees or what are called office holders. And office holders includes directors. Office holders can also be consultants, in the sense that if your CTO or your CFO of the company happens to be a consultant rather than an employee. But generally, we're talking about someone who reports directly to the board in a company that's big enough for that to be meaningful, and not, well, we're 5 people in a room, so of course everyone's reporting to the CEO or the board. But it's important to know also that if it's a consultant that for tax reasons decided to be a company, you can't give compliant grants to that company or to the individual who owns that company, even if it's 100% ownership. There are board approval requirements. There are reporting requirements. The most important and unusual feature in Israel is you need to have a trustee appointed, and that trustee is hired by the company and ostensibly works for the company, but is really an agent of the tax authorities. And their role is to make sure that you're complying with the requirements and that their proper withholding is being done. Because one of the most important, there are a few technical things. When the board makes the grants, they need to report them within a certain amount of time to the trustee. and then you need to paper those grants with award agreements, option agreements, and deliver those to the trustee. And there are deadlines for that. If you don't meet those deadlines, it won't qualify. Even if you meet those deadlines, the employee cannot, or service provider cannot make a sale of the, they can't exercise their options and then sell the shares before 24 months have elapsed from the date of grant, being the date that the board approved the grants. If you do that as well, then it bumps it up automatically into employment income rates. And so the trustee is there to make sure when there is the meeting with the money, that the proper withholding is being done. The trustee also technically will often, especially in a young company, also be like your stock administration. You're sort of outsourcing it. They keep the database. So very often it won't be just Israeli. If you have people in different jurisdictions, they can also be administering that for others. But technically, they're really working with respect to Israeli tax. So timing. When is the right time to make the grant? Well, first of all, because you need to file with the tax authority, at the point where you're just starting the company, yesterday we got our certificate, we're now a separate legal entity, you're not ready to make grants because you need to do a filing with the tax authority, and to file with the tax authority, you need to have tax files, and to have tax files, you need to have a bank account. So there is a certain technical amount of time where it takes before you can start doing this. But there's also other factors, there might be relevant. So because we're deferring the compensation, it's not really relevant. It is possible to sort of to promise employees, I plan to have an ESOP, and I plan to make you grants and not get into the actual technicalities of doing it right away. The other hand, we talked about the technical requirements as this 24-month period, that's a minimum. So if you're a hot company that in 6 months from now, you're going to be bought for I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars, and you haven't gotten your plan up and running yet, that's an issue because the employees are not going to get their compensation on time. So you're going to be in conflict with that 24-month clock. And there are solutions to that, but you can't shorten that period. Doing it too soon, really, the issue is it's a drain on your resources. You have to pay the trustee. You have to think about this. Your lawyers have to be involved making a plan. It's not always your first priority. And again, you might want to be you might want to be focusing on other things. Doing it too late, however, does create issues. There's the 24-month. There's the HR aspect of I promised people that I'm giving them a piece of the company, but I never actually bother to do it. And there are companies that takes a year or more, 2 years, they haven't actually fulfilled this promise. It can create a negative atmosphere. There's also, often this comes up because somebody who is key, who we care about, we want to compensate, we promised options and we never got around to making the plan, and now they're leaving. Well, if you remember, we said that in Israel, to get the beneficial tax rate, they have to be an employee, which means they have to be employed as of the date of the grant. And not only that, the tax authority doesn't like when you're giving things away just as part of a separation package. And so they question whether that validly complies with the requirement for it to be an employee. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, but the point is, if it becomes a crisis, it's not good. It would have been better to have done it in advance, and it can also create even litigation I've seen about, you promised me options, how come now I can only get options that don't qualify and I'll have to pay a higher tax rate. The quick exit is also important. So if a company's suddenly on a fast track to an exit, the ITA has taken the position, well let me take a step back. When you have an exit, basically it usually says that we're going to do something with the employee options. Either we're going to cash them out, or the acquirer is going to take on the options and convert them into options of the acquirer. And that action, you're not just going to ignore it. Like you promised to employees, hey, you're going to get options and they're going to have value. So this is the moment where it becomes, the piece of paper they're holding actually becomes something worth something. And so because of that, if that's happening in the 24-month period from the date of grant, that would trigger a negative tax consequence. For everything that's vested or unvested, there would suddenly be a immediate tax event at the higher rates because you didn't comply with the 24 months. So what happens is in all of those deals, almost without exception, you go to the tax authority and you say, well, as long as the compensation that the employees are going to receive will be held by the same trust and subject to the same rules, that's okay. And so it preserves there's no immediate tax event, and it preserves the preferential tax treatment. The catch is that you need to hold that compensation until the 24 months have elapsed. So if you do, you make grants and a year later you have an exit, that means the employees are not going to see the proceeds from that exit for another year unless they pull it out of the trust and then pay the higher tax rate. So what's the catch? The tax authority in those rulings says, well, we don't want you using the fact that we're nice and we give rulings. Okay. We don't want you using this as an excuse to give bonuses to employees and have them pay less tax. So any grants that are made in the 90 days before you sign an agreement to sell your company are not going to qualify. So this is also a place where I see a lot, there's a crunch. The company promised lots of people things in the company to incentivize them. Suddenly they're on the fast track to an exit, and they don't have enough time to make the grants that'll qualify. And that's a bummer for the employees or for the company that's going to bear the tax cost of it. How much time do I have? 1 minute? 2 minutes? 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay. I'm not going to get into, these are all important questions. How much to give, when to give. I'm going to skip that one. The correct strike price is important. For the beginning stage companies, this is often a deferral of, you're saying, I can't really pay you the salary you deserve, so I'm giving you equity. In that case, it makes sense for the strike price to be low, almost zero, right? It can be the nominal value in Israel. As the company matures, that's not always appropriate. You don't want to be giving away pieces of your company for nothing. You want people to get the upside. So it's usually linked to the value of the shares at the date of grant. There's an issue when you're giving grants to people in the U.S. who are U.S. persons that also requires that to be at the real value. I'm afraid I don't really have time to go through all of this. I'll be here for questions after if there are more questions.
And then